Hi, and welcome back to the Fortify Your Brain Summit. I'm Betsy Schroeder, your host, and today I have as my guest Scott Forsgren. And Scott is a health coach, a blogger, a podcaster, a health writer, and an advocate. He's the editor and founder of BetterHealthGuy.com, where he shares his 23-year journey through the world of Lyme disease, mold illness, and the myriad of factors that chronic illness often entails. He is the co-founder of the Forum for Integrative Medicine, which hosts an annual conference bringing together some of the top integrative practitioners to share practical tools for treating complex chronic illness. He also serves on the board of directors for the Limelight Foundation, which provides treatment grants to children and young adults recovering from Lyme disease. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. So to get started, tell us about your personal health journey with chronic Lyme disease and mold illness, and then how it impacted your brain and nervous system.
Yeah, well, definitely not in a good way. So for me, this whole journey started in Northern California in 1996. I did have a tick bite. I didn't immediately get sick. It took quite some time before we really put the tick bite together in terms of Lyme disease being a piece of the picture. So I started getting really sick in early 1997. It started over the course of a weekend with what felt like a major flu, but it was much worse than any flu I had experienced. I had these head-to-toe burning sensations, so definitely something had impacted my neurological system. It felt like you had been out at the beach for many hours without sunscreen on, and that lasted for many, many months and then flared at different times over the course of several years. Lots of issues with balance, feeling like I was falling out of a chair, feeling like I was rolling off the bed, having to prop up pillows down one side when I was laying in bed so that I at least felt like I wasn't going to roll onto the floor. Getting up and walking across the room was a big challenge. If I look at the list of symptoms now that Lyme disease and mold illness can cause, I certainly had many of them, and yet it took 8 years and 45 doctors before I finally got a diagnosis of Lyme disease, and then a little bit longer to figure out the mold piece as well. So, the difficulty walking, the balance issues, I had lots of visual disturbances, blurry vision, floaters, lines, squiggles. I had a fever, low-grade fever that lasted for over a year, lots of joint and muscle pain, fasciculations or muscle twitching. In one foot, it felt like there was a motor that was just constantly running, this sensation of almost having your foot kind of like on a car engine that just would never stop. Tremors, vibrations, neck pain, lots of discomfort, air hunger. Crawling sensations, which I also attribute now to more of a neurological and nervous system dysfunction, and then things like light sensitivity and sound sensitivity and anxiety and depression and OCD. Some of the cognitive challenges would be things like, having the same phone number for years and someone asking for your phone number and not being able to remember what your phone number was, or driving to a parking garage and going into a building and coming out and realizing that you don't remember where you parked your car. And not only that, there's 3 parking garages and you don't even remember which parking garage you're in. Or one time I remember getting into the back seat of the car that I was going to drive somewhere and sitting there thinking, okay, I know this isn't going to work, but I don't know exactly why I'm in the back seat and what I need to do to get to where I need to go. So lots of brain and cognitive type symptoms. And so that went on from 1997 to 2005. I went to lots of doctors. They all suggested, or many of them suggested, that it was a psychological, referred me to psychiatrists. I did get a diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome, of fibromyalgia. One doctor suggested exploring multiple sclerosis just because a lot of the neurological symptoms that I was experiencing. And back then, there just was not a lot of information that was really known about chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia. What I could find would say that some people get better after about a decade. And for me, that was certainly not acceptable or something I was willing to chance and see. So I was constantly exploring. And then fortunately in 2005, I had started with a new medical doctor, and he suggested that I work with an acupuncturist that at the time was doing something called electroacupuncture according to Roll. It's also known as electrodermal screening. It's a system of energetic testing. And he said, go to her, find out what foods you should avoid, and then just change your diet because that's probably the only thing that's wrong with you. And so she spent about 2 hours with me, and she said, I think you should go back and have your doctor test you for Borrelia, which is the causative agent, or spirochete involved in Lyme disease, Bartonella, Babesia, Ehrlichia, which are all co-infections of Lyme disease, and see if you can get some confirmation of those things. And so we did a number of tests. We eventually did get confirmation that Lyme disease was a factor, that those co-infections were a factor as well. And so at the time, the doctor had said he had a lot of patients that had Lyme disease, that all of my symptoms really matched, that it didn't seem to connect right at first, but that it made a lot of sense. And so, that was the journey into Lyme disease, and the mold piece came later. Fortunately, today I'm doing really well. There's nothing that I can't do. I exercise regularly. My brain works well. I do continue to take really good care of myself. I think once we go through a journey like this, part of the lesson is that we need to prioritize ourselves and our health and do the right things and proper nutrition and manage our stress levels and all of those things. So I think there is a message in going through a chronic health challenge like this that goes on for years. And so at this point, I feel incredibly blessed to have a very active, productive life and to have learned a lot of things throughout the process of the journey of this illness.
Wow. It's a long lesson of 23 years, but yeah.
It is, yeah. A lot of great things came out of it, though, too. A
Yeah.
lot of gifts, a lot of really meaningful relationships. I mean,
Oh
I,
my
I
God.
wouldn't want to give those things up either.
Right, right. So then what helped you to get better? I think you mentioned an 11-step plan, and then can you kind of give an overview of what that was?
Yeah, you bet. So this is really kind of based on my learning from many different mentors. So I want to acknowledge Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt, Dr. Neil Nathan, Dr. Simon Yu, Dr. Raj Patel, so many others that, the universe has really connected me with, and I've been very fortunate to learn from them. And while this kind of 11 steps that I'm going to talk about is the model that I now kind of see and that's emerged in my mind in terms of how to recover from chronic illness, the steps could be different for each individual person. The order could be different. It's not so much a protocol per se, it's more of a framework that hopefully will get people to think about certain steps or certain components of what needs to be done potentially to help recover health, and then have a dialogue based on that with their health provider. So the first step in my mind is detoxification and drainage to improve the terrain. So I think that's the most important. That's why I put it first. The second step would be improving our external environment. So looking at the contribution to our health challenges from mold, from EMFs and things of that nature, and really working to improve that external environment so that we can then in turn improve our internal environment. The third step would be optimizing sleep, just because it's so incredibly critical for healing, for detoxification, for restoration, for repair. So anything we can do to optimize sleep is certainly going to benefit us on several levels of our health journey. Step 4, working on the mental and emotional contributions. So what are the things in terms of past traumas and conflicts and things of that nature that may be either contributing to or setting the stage for a chronic illness, or the chronic illness itself could be creating traumas and conflicts, the invalidation, the lack of support, those kinds of things that we then maybe need to do some work in that realm as well. The fifth step would be looking at the limbic system, so retraining the limbic system and also doing things to support the parasympathetic nervous system. So how do we get out of this fight, flight, or freeze response? Very important that we really calm the nervous system, calm the limbic system. The sixth step would be stabilizing mast cells. So mast cell activation syndrome, histamine intolerance, really calming that whole system down, reducing inflammation, modulating the immune system to the microbes that we're dealing with. A lot of times the symptoms are not from the bugs, but they're from the immune response or host response to those pathogens. Step 7 would be optimizing our nutrition, looking at our microbiome, looking at our gut health. Step 8 is a number of kind of supportive things that I've grouped together at this point, but looking at things like supporting the mitochondria. Are we getting good hydration? Have we looked at things like cryptopyruria? Have we optimized our coagulation or the thickness of our blood? Are we supporting the adrenals? So, primarily supplemental things there that can support the body in the healing process. Step 9 is addressing the microbial overgrowth. So there are certainly organisms that contribute to the various challenges and symptoms that we're having. If we look at Borrelia, for example, it can create quinolinic acid. If we're looking at Candida, for example, it can create aldehydes. If we're looking at parasites, it can create ammonia. So a lot of these things that can certainly affect our brain, our cognition. But the microbial piece I intentionally put towards the end of the process so that we can set the stage first, that it's not so much a battle or a war against a bug or that we have to kill or eradicate every bug in order to get well. So when we get into this step, we're looking at things like the viruses, the activation of our own endogenous retroviruses, parasites, SIBO or other gastrointestinal dysbioses, fungus and yeast, and then things like Lyme disease, so Borrelia, co-infections like Babesia and Bartonella, even opportunistic pathogens like Mycoplasma and Chlamydia pneumoniae, for example. And then we may also need to explore the potential for biofilms that are protecting some of these organisms and do certain things to help minimize those biofilms so that the immune system and the things that we're doing to address the microbes can actually get to them. Step 10 is looking at the dental contributors. So do we have amalgams? Do we have root canals? Do we potentially have cavitations in the jawbone that we need to explore? For some people, this step may need to come much earlier based on their history and the contributors that they have to illness. But again, setting the foundation, I think, helps people be able to better tolerate potential surgical interventions, to heal from them, to really get a good result if you have the other pieces in place first. And then step 11 is looking at, after you've been through a long-term chronic illness, what things do you maybe need to do to regenerate, to repair, to restore the body? So those are the 11 steps that kind of come to mind. It's a kind of a constantly evolving model as we learn new things, and we're not going to get into these in great detail today. So if people are listening and they are interested in more of my thoughts on each one of these, there are interviews on my website where I do kind of drill into each one of them in a little more detail that are certainly available for listeners to go and explore.
Excellent. So going back to the very beginning, when you're talking about detoxification and drainage, they sound really similar. So what is the difference between those two and how do we support them?
Yeah, so detoxification is somewhat of an umbrella term that I think some people incorporate drainage underneath. The difference in my mind is detoxification really is about using binders to help bind to and excrete toxins like heavy metals, chemicals, pesticides, mycotoxins, and get them out of the body, where if you're not using some type of a binding agent like charcoal, like chlorella, like Takasumi Supreme, Zeolite. There's a number of these tools on the market. If you're not using something like that, then there's a very good chance that you are recycling a lot of the toxins with the recycling of the bile that happens. So through enterohepatic recirculation, you're not really getting the toxins out of the system. So the detoxification piece, I primarily think of using binders, using materials that are going to help to unburden the body from the soup of toxins that we all now live within. There's also, as I mentioned, Candida, Lyme, parasites. I mean, there's organisms within us that are also creating toxins that we ideally want to be able to bind and excrete. And then the idea of drainage really is more, how do we support the body's inherent ability or capacity to detoxify? So can we use homeopathic remedies? Can we use herbs to support the liver, the gallbladder, the kidneys, the lymphatic system, the extracellular matrix, for example, the colon? There's so many pieces of the body that we can support, and the body is designed so beautifully. So the detox piece is the binders and the excretion. The drainage piece is supporting and optimizing our exit pathways or emunctories. And then there's a lot of adjunct things we can do in this realm too. So coffee enemas, for example, very, very helpful in the Lyme and mold community. Colon hydrotherapy, ionic foot baths, castor oil packs, sauna, oil pulling. There's a number of things that we can also use to kind of help support minimizing toxins in the body and improving our terrain. But that's essentially the distinction between detoxification and drainage from my perspective.
Okay, so then can you talk about the importance of our environment, like where we're living, what's surrounding us, and then in terms of getting better and optimizing our brains?
So it is very, very, very important. This is one of the most critical pieces. So whether we're looking at mold toxins or mycotoxins or EMFs, they certainly impact our brain. They impact our mitochondria, which is very, very important for our brain. They impact our cognitive function. So if we look at mold or chronic inflammatory response syndrome, that's kind of an ongoing inflammation that's triggered by mold and mycotoxins, that ongoing inflammation affecting the brain, our cognition, affecting our nervous system. It is very difficult to improve our brain function if we are getting exposed to mold and mycotoxins on a daily basis. So really, really critical in many of these chronic illnesses. And I think more and more is still emerging on this, but I think mold is one of the priorities that we really have to investigate if we're struggling with some type of serious chronic condition. And then electromagnetic fields, we're seeing more and more exponential growth of EMFs in our environment. So we know that electromagnetic fields, they can reduce our ability to detoxify. They can affect the blood-brain barrier and open it up so that things, toxins, and other substances are getting into the brain that ideally would not be there. We know that EMFs also threaten various microorganisms outside of us, for example, in a moldy house, but also threatening the organisms that are within us to produce more biotoxins. We know that EMFs can negatively impact our sleep. Probably one of the top causes of insomnia is going to be exposure to electromagnetic fields. We also know that EMFs can disrupt our neurotransmitters. So optimizing our brain, our nervous system health in our world today includes minimizing sources of EMF exposure and then working to improve the environment around us. Certainly, we internally are only going to be as healthy as the environment around us. So I think we have to create a healing space, a healing environment for our recovery, and reducing exposures to mold, to EMFs. Those really are top strategies for improving our health, improving our brains, nervous system, and really moving our health to a higher level.
Oh yeah. So, with that, you talked about EMFs impacting sleep. What did you do? What can we do to optimize our sleep? And what's going to be helpful for healing?
So this was an issue that I fortunately did not experience throughout most of my recovery, but about a year and a half ago, I started having some sleep challenges. So I've been very focused on figuring out how to optimize my own sleep. I've definitely seen a lot of improvement, which is great. It's going to be very individualized. But again, I would say EMF exposure is one of the key reasons that we experience sleep challenges. So looking at our environment and improving that is certainly important. We also need to sleep to help detoxify, our brains. So if you look at the glymphatic system, for example, it's so important that we're optimizing sleep in order to really detoxify and heal. If we're not sleeping, we are not detoxifying, we're really not healing, we're not restoring. So there's a number of different supplements that people can use, like melatonin has been a fantastic tool. I jokingly call it my drug of choice, and I've used it for many, many years. And the benefits go far beyond just sleep. There's a number of things that melatonin is neuroprotective, that it also supports detoxification. So that's been a favorite. Things like GABA or 5-HTP or magnolia bark like hinokiol, for example, but also looking at things like blood sugar. Is it possible that blood sugar is going so low in the middle of the night that then the body's producing cortisol to raise the blood sugar, and thus we're then waking up and not sleeping well? Things like weighted blankets can be helpful for some people. There's a system I really like called Brain Tap, which is a headset that you wear that has a number of different programs in it, some directed at sleep, but also really calming the nervous system, helping to support the parasympathetic nervous system. I've been working with a tool called the Z's Sleep Pebble, Zeez, which is a little device that you put under your pillow, and it puts out frequencies that are supportive of sleep. And many people have found that a helpful tool. Blue light blocking, particularly a couple hours before you go to sleep, so minimizing the use of devices or wearing blue light blocking glasses, for example. And I, at this point, have been able to get to a really good place with sleep where on the Aura Ring, which I use every night to measure my sleep, I'm getting a crown almost every night, which is really good. So kind of combining a number of these strategies has definitely moved things in a good direction. CBD oil is another thing that people can benefit from a sleep perspective, and something that I've incorporated into my routine as well. And then there's another tool that it's been out just for a few months. I've had it now for several weeks, and I'm just really starting to explore it, called the Apollo. It's called the Apollo Neuroband or Apollo system. And it's essentially something that you wear on your inner wrist or ankle that has different vibrations or frequency. It's vibrating at a certain hertz that can both be activating or energizing or meditative, calming, and sleep supporting. And so that's a tool that I'm just really in the process of starting to explore from a sleep perspective. So anything that we can do to help optimize our sleep is going to have so many different effects on the body in terms of healing. And that's why I put this very early in terms of the 11 steps that we talked about.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It makes sense. Yeah, I'll have to try that pebble. It sounds really interesting. So from there, can you talk about mental and emotional health? I know that sleep can impact that. And then what impact did it have on your healing in your brain?
So early on in this whole journey, I really thought that the way to get healthy was to kill the bugs, deal with the infections, get rid of the toxins, and then deal with the mental, emotional health. I kind of put it on the back burner. It certainly couldn't be an issue for me. Why would that be a factor that I need to consider? And so now everything's kind of been flipped on its head. I really think now that the mental, emotional health is number one to explore and really focus on and improve. Then the detoxification piece from a physical perspective, and then again the microbes really kind of later in the whole thought process. So completely the opposite of what I initially thought. And again, I would say that many of us have had some type of trauma or conflict or belief system that set the stage for the illness. But going through something where no one believes you, your doctors don't believe you, your families don't believe you, can be very invalidating. And so the process of going through the illness can also lead to a trauma that we need to deal with in order to really maximize our health outcomes. I would say we all have some emotional issues to work through, and accepting that idea does not mean that the illness is all in our head, but there certainly are contributors of mental, emotional health to the development of a physical condition. So in the Lyme disease community, for example, a very common pattern is type A overachiever perfectionists oftentimes don't really feel deeply that we deserve to be well. I often joke that I've gone from a type A plus personality to a type A minus personality. That's probably as good as it's going to get.
Yeah.
But it's so critical to cultivate healthy relationships and eliminate toxic people from our lives and experience joy in any way that we can find it. anything that we can do to not identify with an illness is also really important. I mean, we may have an illness as part of us, but it's not who we are. Anxiety and depression, very common in Lyme disease and mold illness, in part because of the neuroinflammation, but also because of toxicity and the microbes and things like Bartonella and Babesia that can certainly contribute to anxiety and depression and things of that nature. So to fully optimize our brains and our nervous system, we really need to work through all of the steps, also addressing the microbial contributors as well. And in Dr. Klinghart's 5 levels of healing model, the mental piece is really the 3rd level of the model. So the physical is the 1st level, the mental piece is at the 3rd level. And if you can shift something at that level, there's a downward effect on the other levels, including the physical body. And so the work that we do there is very, very powerful. And some of the tools that people might explore in this realm are things like EMDR, which is an eye movement system, applied psychoneurobiology or psychokinesiology, which are systems that Dr. Klinghart created, EFT, which is a tapping system that many people will be familiar with, emotion code is another. So lots of tools that we can use here. I'm a big fan of a book by Amy Shear called How to Heal Yourself When No One Else Can. And it's a system that really gives readers a lot of tools and things that they can do to help release the impact of things like fear and mental emotional type issues from the system. So it's a bit of some energy therapy that's in this book as well, and gives you very practical things that you can do to help shift the body in a more positive direction in the mental emotional realm.
Wow, great. So along those same lines, I know you've done a thing called limbic retraining, which I've also done. And how is that helpful for your brain?
So the limbic system is the amygdala, the hypothalamus, the hippocampus. It's the feeling and reacting brain. It's also involved in determining whether or not something is safe for us. Is our environment around us safe, for example? It is what's considered the alarm center or the anxiety switch. And so the limbic system is involved in our immune function, our hormonal or endocrine system, the autonomic nervous system, which impacts our blood pressure and heart rate and breathing and digestion and so on. So there's a number of different things that can trigger limbic system impairment. That could be exposure to mold in a water damaged building. It could be chemicals or pesticides or various microbes. It could be physical, mental, emotional trauma. So many things can kind of get us into this trauma loop or limbic system loop. And if you think of a threat like mold, for example, or Lyme disease as a tiger, that there is a time when that is a very real threat. That's probably not the best time to get the optimal benefits from something like DNRS or the amygdala program or limbic system retraining. So ideally, and I'm more familiar with DNRS, ideally you want to address the tiger or address the issue. So maybe you've remediated your home. Maybe that's now not a huge threat to you. Maybe it's like a kitten walking outside the window, but your limbic system has been in this trauma loop. So when it sees the kitten outside the window, it says, oh my God, there's a tiger, and has that same kind of response. And so you use something like dynamic neural retraining system to recalibrate or reboot the limbic system so that you have a more appropriate response to the actual level of threat, whatever that threat may be. So when we look at the limbic system and the inappropriate response that it may be having, that's affecting us on so many levels, the immune system, the endocrine, the autonomic nervous system, and so on, which can continue to lead to a lot of symptoms. Again, I would personally not do DNRS if I was still, living in a moldy house or something along those lines. Now, I do know some practitioners that will use DNRS early on to allow people to better tolerate certain supplements, to allow people to expand their food options. And I think it can be successful there, but to really get it to stick and make a lasting difference, you do want to kind of have this platform of environmental awareness and make sure that you've addressed your tiger, so to speak, and made it more of a kitten, and then you're using it to recalibrate the system. So There are people that think of DNRS as a mental emotional tool. It really isn't. You can use it in that realm for things like PTSD and so on, but I really think of this as more of a physical biochemical response of the limbic system, the amygdala or the fear center. And of all the tools that I've seen, in terms of one tool that's been very significantly helpful for people in this realm of, chronic Lyme disease and mold illness and so on, DNRS is the one where I've seen people go from bedridden, eating 5 foods, to 3 months later, having a much broader or no significant food reactions and being able to travel out of the country on vacation, things like that. So it is, particularly if people have chemical reactions, scents, fragrances, food reactions, I think the benefits of a system like this are apparent much earlier. It is hard work. It takes an hour a day. I did it myself for 7 months. They ask for a minimum of 6 months. So I did it for 7 months. I stopped that now about a year and a half ago, and I still have definite benefits in terms of the way my brain reacts to things, or getting kind of stuck in loops of anxiety and worry and things that have improved, and that improvement has really lasted. So DNRS can be a great tool when we're talking also about, the parasympathetic nervous system. Things like frequency specific microcurrent can be very helpful. Brain tap, which I mentioned earlier, also can be tools to kind of help in this rebooting process and calming the nervous system so that we can better rest, digest, and detoxify. So we are not going to be able to heal if we're in this fight, flight, or freeze response, and really calming the nervous system, calming the limbic system can have some very, very profound benefits in the overall healing process.
Oh, wow. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So, a lot of times when people have these chronic issues going on, there's a lot of inflammation, and it just is hard to get a handle on sometimes, hard to tackle. So how do you go about lowering this chronic inflammation in the body?
Yeah, so the inflammation piece, I think that is the core issue that's involved in a lot of symptoms that people experience with numerous chronic conditions, including brain, nervous system, cognition, Alzheimer's. The list is pretty lengthy. So the things that I would think about in terms of reducing inflammation, again, coming back to detoxification. So, metals and chemicals and pesticides, those can all be triggers for mast cell activation, for inflammation. They are inflammagens. So we want to reduce the toxicity in the body as much as possible. Looking again at the environment, the molds, the mycotoxins, the EMFs, those are huge contributors to inflammation. There's a reason that mold illness is called chronic inflammatory response syndrome. So that is one of the things that we can't overlook in terms of reducing inflammation. Then if we get to looking at the diet, removing any foods that are triggering inflammation, low histamine diet can be phenomenal for people that inflammation is being potentially triggered by mast cell activation and histamine. So that's important. Looking at how we improve leaky gut so that we're minimizing endotoxemia, so that we're minimizing immune activation from things passing through the intestinal tract that shouldn't be there in terms of the bloodstream, for example. Sleep, so important. Lack of sleep can certainly be a contributor to inflammation. So looking at ways to optimize sleep. The mast cell activation piece on its own, the histamine, the immune modulation, very important. Again, it's not the host response to a microbe that's critical. It's not the bug itself, but it's that immune bug interaction. And so microbes can trigger inflammation. And if we look at viruses and parasites and fungi or Lyme and co-infections and how to manage that, but more importantly, or as importantly, how to modulate the immune response so that we're not overreacting or having this hyperactive response to the microbes that are within us. So many of our symptoms that come from microbes are from mast cell activation and this resulting inflammation from a hyperactive immune system or hyperactive host response. So if we're looking at things to potentially help in these realms, mast cell stabilizers and histamine reducers, so things like luteolin or quercetin or holy basil, those can be helpful with inflammation. There are some products like Neuroprotect or brain gain that were put together by Dr. Theo Heridas, who's an expert in the mast cell realm. Very, very helpful for reducing inflammation. There's some probiotics like Seeking Health's Probiota Histaminax that Dr. Ben Lynch formulated to help deal with reducing inflammation in the gut. Then some of the tools for immune modulation, looking at low-dose naltrexone or low-dose allergen therapy or low-dose immunotherapy. Peptides are emerging as a tool that can really help with immune modulation. So things like thymosin alpha-1 or thymosin beta-4, for example. Homeopathy, that can also help with modulating the immune system so it's less likely to overreact and create excessive inflammation. And then a number of things like curcumin or turmeric, or ginger. There's a product from Orthomolecular Products called Inflamma Blocks that I find very helpful. CBD can be great, black seed oil. And then there are also a number of homeopathics that people could use. So I like one from a company called Energetics that's called Relief Tone, but arnica and other tools can have effects on inflammation in the body as well. And then for me, coffee enemas were a huge player in reducing pain, supporting inflammation, improving my cognitive clarity, mental clarity. And so for people that are open to exploring coffee enemas, I think that can play a big role in inflammation and in our cognition.
Wow, a lot of great tips there. So how do you now continue to fortify your brain and prevent that chronic inflammation, stay healthy?
I still do a lot to take care of my health. I do have a major focus on detoxification and drainage. That's something I will always do. I think if we were optimally detoxifying, we probably wouldn't have symptoms of chronic illness. So that detox support is something that's really important on an ongoing basis. I do continue to make sure that my environment is as health supporting as possible. So making sure that mold is not an issue, that EMFs are reduced. I do occasionally do coffee enemas at this point. It's not something I do nearly as much as I once did, but if I have a day where I just feel off or feel like I'm starting to come down with something, that can be a great tool. I do eat a gluten-free diet, low sugar, very high nutritionally dense food. So every morning I have a power shake that has healthy fats and proteins and things like fiber, phosphatidylcholine, collagen, butyrate, flax seeds, just to really kind of get the day started off in a positive direction. I do take melatonin, which helps not only the sleep, but also is neuroprotective and detoxifying. CBD oil is something that I use in the evenings for sleep support. And then I have some nutrients in my protocol as well that are also brain supporting. So things like lithium orotate that can support the production of BDNF, which is really helpful in terms of stem cells and brain function and so on. Taurine also can help activate the neuronal stem cells and create new brain cells. So those kinds of supplements can be helpful. Magnesium threonate is a form of magnesium that can be really supportive of brain health and cognition. I also use occasionally a topical NAD cream that really helps to support the mitochondria. So the brain being very dense in mitochondria, that's something that I do notice can help a lot with my cognition. I exercise about 5 days a week. I use different energetic therapies and light therapies, things like frequency specific microcurrent and Juve and red juvenator and things of that nature to help support the mitochondria and the production of energy. So still a number of things that I do and really continue to make myself a priority, but I'm so incredibly blessed with the progress that I've gotten over the last many years.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, it sounds like it. So where can people go then to learn more about you, follow, listen to your podcast, all of that?
Yeah, so betterhealthguy.com is my main site. The podcast, they can find it there. They can find it on YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and Spotify. So all of the main channels. You mentioned in my bio, but I want to say that the Limelight Foundation, I've been a board member of that organization since 2013, and we provide treatment grants to children and young adults 25 and under that cannot access medical care for the treatment of Lyme disease because of their financial situation. And so we've now given out over $5 million to grant recipients in 49 states. And if someone's listening that either could benefit from a grant or is in a position to help support the foundation and our goals and objectives, we would certainly love to hear from them. And that is limelightfoundation.org. And then lastly, I think with these complex conditions, it's so many new and exciting things that are emerging that I think it's very important to just be hopeful. Now more than ever, I think there's lots of reasons to be hopeful that we can really improve our health and our condition and move forward in a very positive direction.
Yes. Thank you so much for all of your time and resources. Really appreciate it.
You bet. It was an honor.
Thank you.